So think back for a second to the very last time you were totally alone. Maybe you were pacing your living room or just staring at your computer screen and you caught yourself muttering out loud. You know that sudden pang of embarrassment, looking over your shoulder just to make absolutely sure nobody heard you? Well, guess what? You definitely aren't alone. Society kind of loves to frame this habit as a bit strange, odd, or maybe even a little lonely. But psychology? It tells a completely different story. Scientists have literally spent decades studying this, and they've proven that talking out loud to yourself isn't some glitch in the matrix. It's actually a sign of a highly developed, incredibly active mind. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the 7 rare psychological traits revealed by this one quiet habit. Section 1. The stigma of self-talk. Why society misunderstands thinking out loud. Okay, let's dive into this. The real underlying question we need to ask ourselves is this: are you just weird? Or are you actually building inner mastery? Because once we really start looking at the psychology of the self-talker, we uncover traits that most people spend their entire lifetimes trying to develop. Section 2. Mastering your inner world. Self-awareness and emotional control. And this brings us to the first rare trait, a much, much higher level of self-awareness. You see, while most of us kind of move through the day on total autopilot, reacting to things without a second thought, self-talkers literally stop and interrogate their own choices out loud, using what psychologists call reflective awareness. It's basically the act of splitting your mind right in two. One part of you acts, while the other part takes a step back to observe and really examine your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions. It's like a mental mirror. It doesn't just reflect what you're doing right now, it reflects who you are becoming. It's this absolutely vital, small act of paying attention to yourself. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this isn't some brand new modern concept. Nearly a century ago, Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky mapped out this entire evolution of what he called private speech. In childhood, kids use private speech out loud all the time, right? It guides their behavior. But in adulthood, for the vast majority of the population, that speech goes underground. It becomes the silent inner voice. But the self-talker, they keep this vocal examination alive and kicking their entire life. This active self-examination naturally leads to our next trait, exceptional emotional regulation. Actually, try this experiment. The next time you're feeling super stressed, instead of silently saying to yourself, "I'm so anxious," use your own name out loud. Or say, "you." Tell yourself, "Okay, you've got this, you've handled way worse." Psychologist Ethan Kross from the University of Michigan has built a massive part of his career studying this exact shift. What Kross found is that this tiny linguistic trick creates psychological distancing. It literally transforms your voice into a calming internal coach. By just switching from I to you immediately stop drowning in the feeling itself. You take a step slightly outside of the chaos, you calm your nervous system right down, and you coach yourself through the stress exactly the way a best friend would. You aren't just reacting anymore, you're actively regulating your mind in real time. Section 3. Boosting cognitive performance. Problem solving and extreme focus. Ever notice how engineers are always muttering at whiteboards, or grandmaster chess players whispering while thinking through their next move? They're utilizing what psychologists call the self-explanation effect. When you've got this tangled mess of ideas, saying them out loud forces your brain to hit the brakes. You turn fuzzy, half-formed thoughts into precise words. This naturally creates a single logical sequence you can actually follow. Plus, it acts as a real-time quality check. Your ears catch flawed logic so much faster than your silent brain ever could. Every spoken sentence becomes a literal step that turns a mental brick wall into an open door. And this cognitive boost, it feeds right into trait 5, greater focus. We usually assume that extreme focus has to be dead silent, head down, mouth shut. Absolute myth. Look at these everyday examples of instructional self-talk. Athletes are constantly saying things like, "eyes up," or "stay low." I mean, you've probably repeated a phone number out loud just to remember it, or muttered keys, wallet, phone right before walking out the front door. These short spoken cues measurably improve your performance by steering your attention right back to what actually matters. Spoken words actively lock your attention onto a single task, completely shutting out all that background noise. When you talk yourself through your work, you're effectively turning yourself into your own personal coach. And the best part? That coach never, ever stops paying attention. Section 4. Fueling creative independence. Connecting ideas and trusting your own judgment. When you're willing to think out loud, creativity basically becomes a brainstorm with a room full of different versions of you. You can ask what if and literally answer yourself in a completely different voice, debating and arguing with your very own ideas. You see, when ideas stay locked silently inside your head, they kind of just circle the same familiar, safe grooves. But when you speak them out loud, those ideas take on a physical shape. They can be examined, twisted, challenged, combined. Half-formed thoughts collide into strange, brilliant new connections that silent logic alone would simply never reach. This creative independence naturally builds our sixth trait, a fiercely strong independence of thought. Most people completely rely on the crowd. When they're unsure, they reach outward. They ask around, they scroll online, they look for someone else to tell them what to think or to give them permission. But the self-talker? They rely on the inner voice. They turn inward first. They question, they test, and they build this wonderfully rebellious habit of trusting their own personal judgment before ever borrowing anyone else's. Because of this habit, a truly independent thinker can comfortably stand on their own conclusions. Now, you might be thinking, doesn't that make them a bit arrogant or stubborn? Actually, research suggests the exact opposite. Because they're so used to arguing with themselves out loud, they're often way quicker to admit when they're wrong. They don't need the world's permission to feel sure of a decision because they've already had the rigorous debate that matters most. Section 5. The engine of growth. A relentless drive to improve. Now, let's see how this all builds. This is where all the previous traits we've covered, the self-awareness, the problem-solving, the emotional control, they all weave together into one continuous drive. Just look at how deliberately a self-talker reacts to common life events compared to your average person. After a really hard day, they replay it out loud to see what could be done differently. Before a big moment, they rehearse it to prepare. When they fail, they don't just wallow. They explicitly ask themselves what that failure has to teach them. They treat their entire life like an ongoing project, using their inner dialogue as a constant, self-adjusting feedback loop. Because, real growth actually happens in thousands of small, private conversations. It's usually not born from dramatic, sudden leaps. It's built in those quiet moments where you hold yourself accountable out loud, you forgive yourself, and you decide to try again tomorrow. That voice in the empty room is absolutely not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is the sound of a mind that simply refuses to stop improving. Section 6. Embracing your inner voice. Turning a perceived flaw into a superpower. So the absolutely crucial point is this. The very next time you catch yourself talking to yourself when nobody else is around, and you feel that old, familiar urge to be embarrassed, just pause. Pause and remember these 7 rare traits. Higher self-awareness, stronger problem-solving, exceptional emotional regulation, deeper creativity, greater focus, independent thinking, and continuous personal growth. Every single one of these is carried by one quiet voice. What the rest of the world quickly dismisses as just some odd quirk actually turns out to be one of the most remarkably useful cognitive tools the human mind has ever developed. And the absolute best part? You've had this tool all along. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question directly from our source material today. Do you talk to yourself when you're alone? And if so, which of these 7 traits sounds the most like you? Be honest with yourself, embrace that inner voice, and let it guide you toward mastery. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep exploring those fascinating ideas out loud.